We left each other only a couple of days at the beginning of the second week of Season 4 when we looked at the first initial results of the second week of this Season 4. Now, though, that the week has ended, we can go back to check the completion of this Awakened week, which gave us our first fortified week in Mythic Plus as well as Aberrus in its Awakened version. This was a relevant week for power upgrades because of course players got their hands on their first bullion, meaning their first best in slot item, together with the first vault item at high item level, as well as of course the majority of the players getting now their hands on the 4-piece set bonus of the new tier set of Season 4. So starting from a Mythic Plus angle, we looked at what happened only a couple of days into the week, and when you compare it to what happened at the end of the week, there are some interesting differences, because even though a few things don't change, Shadow Priest, Destruction Warlock, Marksmanship, Beast Mastery, Ret, Demo are still there, are still doing well in Mythic Plus, there are a couple of new entries. One new entry is Elemental Shaman, and the other new entry is Unholy Death Knight, who finished the week in the top 5 of performers. Now this is doubly interesting because when we go and look at how the second week ended in terms of popularity, we can't even see the number of the red line of Unholy DK because of how small that was, and the one for Elemental is not, that much larger either. Yet their performance was very, very good. Now, we will have, actually, tomorrow, I believe, an entire video dedicated to this, as to why are they doing better now, and what is the difference between the two, because in terms of damage, they do some quite different things. In the case of Unholy, Unholy is very similar to another spec currently at the top of performance, which is Destruction Warlock. Unholy utilizes their uncapped, or we could say soft capped at 20 targets, large AoE damage on a reasonably short cooldown, but still very cooldown based. No, it's not the Unholy DK of old, with larger 3-minute cooldowns with like 9 GCDs before they even start doing damage, but their Apocalypse plus Abomination are still a cooldown combo they want to follow up every minute, basically. They do differ slightly, unlike Destruction, that's also why they are weaker, because they are on a timer. Their burst cooldown does have a 15-ish, 20-ish second timer, after which their damage was going to start falling down by a lot. But in terms of massively large AoE pools, multi-pack pools in Mythic Plus, especially this last week in Fortified, where presumably mobs last for longer, that is where they were doing so well. While Elemental Shaman was good for other reasons. Elemental Shaman is good for almost the opposite. It's not closer to Destruction or to Shadow, it is actually closer to Marksmanship, to Ret, to Beast Mastery. They are a kind of spec that has a limited number of targets they can hit, usually, 5 or 6, with a very upfront damage. You don't require 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 GCDs before they start their rotation. They don't have massive cooldowns they depend on. Even nowadays, their Fire Elemental, even if it reads 2.5-minute cooldown, it actually only has a 1-minute cooldown, because of the cooldown reduction. Their Liquid Magma Totem they use to spread Flame Shocks only has a 1-minute cooldown, and that is really all they need. All they need is a bunch of Flame Shocks on multiple mobs, and then they start machine gunning Lava Bursts. But the machine gun of Lava Bursts is tied to the amount of Flame Shocks you have out, which is usually limited to, 6, 8 on a good day. Doesn't spread further than that. So of course, when you're pulling 20 mobs, that's not ideal for Elemental Shaman. Those are the two different kinds of damage profiles in which these two specs are doing very well, and they are also the two damage profiles you will see the most in Mythic Plus. One kind is towards the high end of keys, while the other kind is towards the low end of keys. The higher you go in keys, the more dangerous and large pulls you will have to go for, meaning mobs will stay alive for longer, or you will be targeting more mobs than usual. That's where Unholy DK or Destro or Shadow Priest type of damage does very well. And then you have the other kind of damage towards the lower level of keys, 13, 12, 11, 10 key level range, That's where you're pulling one pack at a time, maybe 1 or 2 packs at a time. You're not making that many large pulls. Mobs also have less HP, they die more quickly, so you have less time to ramp up. You have less time to have longer pulls. Quick upfront burst that doesn't require a lot of setup becomes much more valuable. So specs with upfront damage like that become way more valuable at that key range. And that is where a spec like Elemental Shaman can do much better. That was as far as the performance of the specs in Mythic Plus. In terms of popularity, as we mentioned, nothing really much changed for now. In terms of these two specs we have seen doing better, Unholy and Elemental Shaman. We do still see what we looked at last week, which was Destruction Warlock actually continuing to do better. They finished the week improving on their week 1 popularity. As we mentioned when we saw Vengeance being so low, we were like, yeah, it's only a couple of days into the week, don't worry, by the end of the week will possibly be even higher than before, and indeed they were. 91% representation in week 2 of tanks. We continue to have Resto Druid making up for over half of the healers in Mythic Plus. It might lose still, there might be the chance of it losing a bit of value due to the double combat rest brought by Resto Druid together with Destro, but right now Destro has a long way to go before growing even more in terms of popularity. Even if we were to look right now at the popular compositions of week 2 of Mythic Plus, even though sure we start to see more and more Destro Warlocks, the major bringer of your combat rest is still going to be your neighboring Resto Druid. You still have a decent presence of Mistweaver, often paired either with a Red Paladin or with a Destro Warlock to deliver the combat rest, and we still have a reasonable split. It's starting to get a bit more contested. Who is bringing Bloodlust? Is it the... what's this green color? I don't know, this dark green, or is this teal? Who is bringing Bloodlust? It started to get a pretty decent split between Fire and Augmentation. In this current week, Augmentation has continued to have a pretty decent representation, similar at this point to the one of Fire. The only one who hasn't moved from its very large popularity at this point is Shadow Priest, which is funny because we just spent a couple minutes talking about Bloodlust and Combat Rest. Shadow Priest brings neither, so actually it's making things harder for everyone else because they are taking up a spot in your group without actually bringing any of the mandatory requirements in your Mythic Plus group. It does still look like it is going to continue down the path we mentioned last week, which is the fact that with Restoration Druid being the popular healer at this point, and Vengeance Demon Hunter being the popular tank, and now Shadow Priest being chosen as your DPS, not bringing a useful tool like Bloodlust, you need to find your Bloodlust in one of the other 2 options in your group, which seem to be either Fire or Augmentation, with the last option being somewhat up for grabs. Right now, before it was Ret, now it seems to be more Destruction Warlock focused. But as we mentioned, this result will depend a lot, will vary a lot based on the key level you are in. Don't be surprised if you invite a Destro Warlock to a plus 11 key, thinking he's the flavor of the month pick, and then he's gonna get easily outdamaged by a BM Hunter. That's because if you pull pack by pack 5 or 6 targets at a time, a BM Hunter will easily smoke a Destro Warlock in damage, even a Shadow Priest in damage. And same goes for a Red Paladin, an Elemental Shaman, even an Arms Warrior will easily have higher upfront burst damage on a lower number of targets than these supposedly flavor of the month picks like Shadow or like Destruction, which are powerful for other reasons than small target pools. That's how it goes right now for Mythic Plus. This week will be relevant actually quite a bit because it's let's just say the first serious tyrannical week, right? The first week was the start of the season. Players had very little item level for the season. Most players didn't even have the 4-piece set bonus, etc, etc. Now it's gonna be a much more fleshed out power level for each character to try to get into tyrannical difficulty in Mythic Plus. Now, what is going to be less relevant, however, is going to be the raid. Because yes, we have our Awakened Aberus results right now, but The raid, as it has become quickly clear for many, is quite loosely balanced. It was clearly tuned for around 500-ish item level, very simply by how difficult Vault was, where in week 1 barely 30 guilds got to defeat Razaget. Compare this then to week 2, where over 300, 10 times as many guilds got to defeat Sarkaret. So these results are somewhat difficult to interpret. We see Devastation Evoker being the higher in the results for Aberrus. This is what we looked at in terms of results in the first couple of days of Mythic Aberrus. You can see that out of nowhere Unholy now jumped up some 15 rankings in the results. Arms Warrior also went up by quite a lot in the performance, so did Red Paladin. Now, a more observing mind might say, this looks like someone who was able to get their bullions up and got themselves a legendary axe at 535 item level. That looks like exactly what happened. If we are to be honest, looks like the two-handed legendary gang got themselves a pretty powerful boost in this week. Of course, Fury, still being stuck with a broken meme tier set, wasn't doing nearly as hot. As always, I'm a pretty good supporter of wanting to see Flavor of the Month specs in Mythic Plus to be different than the ones who are good in the raid. It's nice to see Destruction Warlock being meta in Mythic Plus, but not nearly as much in the raid, for example. Or Arms Warrior not really being a thing in Mythic Plus, but having one of the better results in the raid. It does free up some more variety. It does keep players a bit more engaged, rather than feeling weak and feeling useless everywhere, which is kind of the notion nowadays tanks are going to have if they're not playing Vengeance. You might have noticed it yourself in the Looking for Group tool. Last week we had an epidemic of a mix between fortified scaring tanks and most tanks having an identity crisis, not wanting to play because they weren't Vengeance. Queue times upwards of 20 minutes standing still in the Looking for Group tool looking for a tank. That was the experience. But for DPS and healers, it's a pretty good situation. Even in the healing department of the raid, there isn't even much to nitpick here if you look at the HPS difference. Between Discipline and Restoration Druid in Aberrus, there was literally a 5,000 HPS gap. So we are talking about a 1.5% difference in healing in the raid. So pretty much entirely about, the item level. Since it's the start of the season, many players could have been 515 to others being 505, and then maybe the powerful trinkets certain healers got compared to others, maybe even the healing cooldowns, since at least as far as my guild goes, we are completely YOLOing all cooldowns. So for all I know, one priest could be dumping Salvation and the other monk could be dumping Revival at the same time. So nice for the other healer who now gets to use his cooldowns alone. There doesn't seem to be really any other drastic difference for healers. It is a bit sad, right? You wished this could have been the situation of healers, a few months ago when Season 3 actually began, rather than keeping, Mistweaver super broken and Resto Shaman and Holy Priest very weak for months. I would have wanted to see this as a result for healers, but, at least we got it at the very end of the expansion. And yes, okay, fine, I have to point this out. I just said it's cool to see DPS specs having, powerful moments in Mythic Plus and then different specs having powerful moments in the raid. Not the case for healers. Holy Paladin is shit everywhere. Unfortunately, the yet another rework and the attempts of Blizzard to making this hybrid caster / melee type of healers has not really worked that well ever since their Exodia version of Season 2 was nerfed to the ground. Holy Paladin has not had a great time overall. Luckily, the expansion is ending and hopefully something better for them will come by the next expansion. But for today, this was everything related to what happened in terms of results in both the Raid and Mythic Plus in Week 2 of Season 4. There are some interesting changes in Mythic Plus for now in terms of performance of a couple of specs, surprising, as well as a nice to see difference in power between specs in the raid compared to how specs are doing in Mythic Plus. Although not really happening for tanks, where Vengeance is still dominating and also a couple of the healers are still kind of having a bad time in this season, starting with Holy Paladin. So with this recap out of the way on this Wednesday, it's time to leave each other. We're starting, as usual, by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which can, as usual, still be given completely for free by doing deeds such as liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching, see you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, bonk, 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 home renovations, bonk.